Hey bookmarks and bookworms, welcome back to the channel. I'm super excited for today's video. I'm actually posting it earlier than I thought I would be. I got through these samples way quicker than I thought I would. So even the books that I have read and DNF'd from this year's Women's Prize longlist, I have gone back and reread the sample of. Just because some of these books I DNF'd last May, and so I wanted to make sure that it was kind of a fair shot for each book, that they're all fresh in my mind and I'm comparing them against the same kind of reading parameters. So the things I'm going to be looking for today are style of writing, concept, characterization, form, theme, narrator's voice, because all of these things I feel you can find out within the first 10% of a novel, more or less, if you're going to gel with that book. Maybe you get into a book and you find, I don't know, the narrator's voice isn't for you, or the style of writing isn't for you. So much of this stuff we can figure out for ourselves in the first 10%. So I thought the goal behind this video today is basically to give you guys a good jumping off point as to where you may want to start with this year's Women's Prize longlist books. There is a lot of variety on this year's longlist in terms of genre, author, region of the world, historical time period, and writing style. But what I found interesting and noteworthy is that thematically, this is a pretty homogenous group of books in that 7 out of the 16 books focus on the theme of migration, and 6 out of the 16 books focus on motherhood. So that is 13 out of 16 books, primarily focusing on only 2 themes. I'm going to start by talking about the first book that I read and go all the way through to the last, giving you my thoughts in as objective way as possible, in an analytical way as possible, to give you guys the best chance of figuring out for yourself, even if I didn't like a book, maybe the elements that I'm talking about are exactly the sort of things that you look for in your books, and so it's a helpful reference point anyway for you to think, yes, I'm going to go for that book because this thing that Charlotte said is exactly what I love to read. And then at the end I will conclude with my final ranking and also the books that I will be continuing to read throughout Women's Prize season, the select few books that I will be continuing with and speaking about on the Women's Prize plod along in May and that sort of thing. So first up, I read Brotherless Night. This kicked the list off to a promising start as we drop into a prologue where the narrator is directly addressing you and successfully manages to do what is a very hard thing and make us soften towards characters that have been set up in the beginning, that we know and have been identified as terrorists, and so we have been softened to that. She has introduced the theme and the characters well. One line that I think sums this up fairly well is the first thing 2 terrorists say to each other is hello, like any 2 people you might know or love. However, when we jumped out of the prologue and into the main story, I found that it quickly became very padded out with a lot of description and a lot of exposition, which I don't typically like in my storytelling. This is very much glacial storytelling with plenty of extra bulk and padding that some readers are going to really like because they can sink into it and spend a lot of time here, but I actually don't. That just isn't for me. If you know absolutely nothing about the Sri Lankan Civil War, then this book is certainly a better entry point than books like A Passage North, that was an absolutely sublime novel, shortlisted for the Booker Prize, I believe in 2021. As Brotherless Night sets up in quick and basic terms some of the social history that triggered the war that went on between the Sinhalese and the Tamils. So for this one, having started off with a really punchy, impressive opening prologue, I found that I got quite bored with the elongated tangents and meandering storytelling that I feel like if I had continued with this novel, I would be skimming large swathes of it. Up next is In Defense of the Act. I am really excited to talk about this book. This was such a nice surprise. It has a really engaging writing style, it's quick. The writing has pace and it's not overwritten. The form isn't stodgy and overall leaves me with a great first impression of this novel. This writing is really, really working for me in combination with a protagonist who is very pragmatic, very blunt, almost acerbic in her judgment of other people, which will jibe with some readers and not with others. From the outset, we are introduced to this narrator who we know is not going to be holding back in her opinions during this novel. So this book is tackling suicide and mental health in the UK. Now, having known people in my life living in the UK that have tried to go through the NHS for mental health and suicide help, it is massively underfunded, really poorly equipped. I could spend a whole other video talking about just the craziness, but I am not the person to talk about it. Whilst I have some knowledge from other people in my life and what they've been through, I do not have first-hand experience. I'm not going to talk about the state of the NHS in terms of mental health and suicide and the help that is available or not available for people in the UK. But to my knowledge, it is poor, really poor. I mean, the whole NHS is struggling right now, but mental health services have always been underfunded, have always been really hard to access, and have always had to prioritise based on severity, which means that the people who are deemed not as severe a case don't get access to therapists, medication, all of what they need, basically. So I'm really pleased that this book is talking about suicide and mental health in the UK, because this will give this discussion more of a platform and more of a reach. I'm really looking forward to hearing the discussion around this book over the coming months related to the prize. And whilst I know it will have absolutely no bearing on how the NHS is funded and funding for mental health, because that is not within the bounds of the Women's Prize, it is at least able to raise awareness, and that is a brilliant thing. So yeah, I'm really, really excited this is on the list. From the outset of this novel, this is explosive to say the least. We follow a 4-year-old little girl as she tries to carry a cup of tea up to her dad, who's in bed. And we see her struggling because she's 4, so she's struggling trying to balance the mug, and it's spilling, and she's trying to get up the stairs, and she's burning her hand, and she's got a hand on one part of the staircase trying to balance herself, and this is a big feat of determination for this 4-year-old child, because she absolutely adores her dad and wants to give him a cup of tea in bed, sort of thing. And she has been tasked, she's given the responsibility of getting this tea from her mum up to her dad in his bedroom. And so this poor 4-year-old little girl opens the bedroom door of her parents' room and discovers her dad dead in bed. He's died of a drug overdose, intentional drug overdose. He's committed suicide, and yeah, the author does not hold back at all. She even uses the phrase, and I quote, his family will be far better off without him. So, as the title suggests, this narrator is speaking in defence of the act, in defence of suicide, and that is going to spark a lot of debate, surely, within the booktube community, within the bookish readers of the Women's Prize. I can't see how this could possibly not spark immense debate around suicide, whether you have an opinion on it either way, whether you form one on the basis of this book, whether this book influences your opinion in any way, changes your opinion in any way, because on the one hand you have the choice to commit suicide, and then you have the choice being presented in this novel by this author that there's also the choice to commit suicide within your family home, where there is the strong possibility of your 4-year-old child discovering your body. Like, there is a lot being said to and unpack in that really harrowing scenario that this author has set up for us. This is the type of book that I have been thinking about once I've put it down. So I've put this book down, I will be picking it back up again for sure, but this is the sort of book that I'm still thinking about throughout my day. Well written, inflammatory subject matter, and one that I will be continuing with. Next, I read The Maiden, which was really surprising. It was a nice surprise in terms of its form and its writing style, especially for this genre. I went in with pretty low expectations from kind of a UK historical fiction vantage point, but the form and writing style of this exceeded my expectations. This is, I would say, a refreshing and needed piece of light relief on a long list that includes In Defense of the Act, right? So it's a nice counterbalance to what's going on there. This is a very similar narrative to what you think you would find in a typical historical fiction piece. We follow a very privileged young woman living in 17th century Scotland who is destined to marry well and be someone's wife for the rest of her life, rather than live out her modern day woman fantasies of independence and writing and travelling the world. And you know, when they say it's a modernist retelling and a feminist retelling, it's exactly what you would think. It's a character who fundamentally has the mindset of living in the 21st century, putting her in the 17th century, and her being disappointed that her life is only, you know, looking at fabrics for curtains and what wedding gown she's going to wear and who her husband's going to be. Like, I feel like this has been done time and time again, right? This is the narrative. But the fact that this young girl that we meet is in fact the prime suspect for a brutal murder excites things a bit, it gets things going a bit, and elevates this novel from the pack, I would say. I'd say this is probably why it's been nominated, because the truth is going to be slowly unveiled to us throughout the course of this novel. It's this violence and how violence is functioning in the novel to subvert gender power dynamics within the context of 17th century Scotland is what makes this novel alluring. And for me, I personally think I will continue with this. Everybody needs this sort of novel in their reading life occasionally. It is absolutely full of two-dimensional archetypal characters. You have your modern woman trapped in 17th century Scotland who wants to travel the world, not be this silent, submissive woman that she's supposed to be. You have the evil uncle with nefarious intent towards his young niece. You have the beautiful blonde airhead of a younger sister who marries before her older sister gets married. Lydia Bennet, anyone. You have the overbearing mother whose sole aim in life is to get all of her daughters married off. Mrs. Bennet, anyone. And you have the exciting cloth merchant Lothario, who becomes the pen pal / romantic love interest of our tragic protagonist. So up next I'm going to talk to you guys about Hangman. This was almost stream of consciousness, but not. So I don't want to put you off by saying stream of consciousness, because it isn't. It really isn't. There's enough pace in it and separation of scenes for it to not be stream of consciousness, but it does have that almost fever dream quality to it where I'm not quite sure what's going on. We have some flashbacks also within the first 10% where he's on a plane travelling back to his home country, having spent, I think, 25 years in the US. But we are flashbacking to when he lived in said home country. Weird things happen in the sense of the guy sitting next to him on the plane dies, and also a man who says he's his brother, but it is not his brother, picks him up from the airport. He also leaves the airport with absolutely no money whatsoever. So already we're being set up for a really intriguing story as to what is going to happen from here. Whilst being baffling, it is also an incredibly readable and compelling story. Whilst I'm intrigued enough to definitely continue with this novel for now, I feel like this could potentially be a DNF depending on how it pans out from this point. If it continues to kind of take flight, then absolutely great, but it could always falter and come crashing back to the land. The fifth one that I'm going to talk to you about today is The 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster. Now, I really want to be objective in all of my reviews today, but this one made it really, really hard to be objective. Not a lot in this book appeals to me, not the writing, not the region in which it's set, not the narrative voice, not the constant use of foul language, even though I believe it is linguistically appropriate for its setting. The sample of this isn't even that long, and I found myself really resisting the urge to skim it. I am really struggling to understand why this is on the long list, so I personally will be having my eye out for positive reviews of this to understand what people see in this and what the other side of the coin is saying, because I can find no redeeming feature in this and I will definitely not be continuing with it. The book I read next is And Then She Fell. Now, right off the bat, this is not the sort of book that I would usually pick up. Right away, you are accosted with the mental image of a 13-year-old child deliberately rolling up her shorts so that more of her thigh can be exposed for old men to look at, whilst not even half a page later, same said child is then being assaulted in a porta potty by one of the older guys that she was rolling her shorts up for. The whole sexualization of children, I feel, is something that is really hard to justify in a novel. I feel like it made me really quite queasy to read. Maybe that's just my sensitivity as a reader, but I can't see how it's appropriate to write about children in this way. There is just something gross about the sexualization of pubescent girls, and to have it on a women's prize long list, I am really struggling to be able to justify that. The sexualization of the female body is continued throughout the first 10% of the novel, albeit we shift from a child body to it being of an adult body, which I guess, you know, marginally better. Well, it's a lot better, but it was really overwhelming and just left me feeling kind of sick, really, to my stomach. Even now, recalling it to you guys, I probably look and I feel really uncomfortable. Okay, moving on to a nicer book. This is Soldier Sailor. I read this, I guess, Is this the 7th book? And the form of this one is what makes this, I think, especially interesting. It is stream of consciousness, which I know several people have mentioned, and they've still got on with it, or it's meant they haven't got on with it. I personally have given this 2 shots now. This is one of the ones that I DNF'd, I think, several months ago, and I picked it back up for the sake of this video, and I have tried. I have really, really given it my best shot to like this book and to try and put the stream of consciousness style to the side and try and look past it, but it's just a style that's not for me. So I know that without wanting to take anything away from this book, because the form is interesting and what's being said is interesting and it's going to suit so many people, just in terms of my personal preference, this is not going to rank anywhere near the top of the list for me. The mother in this story is writing a letter to her infant son, and she references his name, Sailor, pretty frequently at the end of the sentences, which reminded me of Rachel Cusk's Second Place. She also does that. She's also talking to somebody and she uses their name frequently at the end of lines, and I remember at the time people said it really annoyed them, but I thought it was fine. I didn't notice it really. I thought it was great. Great book. I thoroughly recommend that book. For so many people, this is going to be a win of a book. This could potentially be the winner for this year's prize. Maybe this, or maybe Anne Enright's, I think, would be my top 2 front runners, I would say, now for this. But for me, just I'm not interested enough in a woman's marriage breakdown while she raises her infant son, enough for me to stick with a narrative style that just I can't get on with. Next up I want to talk about is A Trace of Sun. This one, from the 10% that I read, I believe we open up in Granada and a son has found out that his mother has received a call from her husband to join him in England. So, but the aspect of this novel that I really struggled with was the Grenadine accent, the dialect that was used throughout the exposition of this novel. Similarly to the Jamaican-based novel Fire Rush that was nominated for last year's Women's Prize longlist, both of these novels use Creole or patois, and whilst the whole book is not written in Creole patois, just the exposition, it was coming up enough. It meant that what happened was I would be reading, I would then get stuck on some Creole and patois and be pulled out of the story and the narrative to try and decipher and translate what has been said, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. That I was, every so often, I was being pulled out of the story to then try and get myself back into it again. And that stop-start was really not helping me in my reading experience of this novel, especially when you get into a reading rhythm with a book. That's really important, and it's something that gets me through a book. And so this stop-start had a knock-on effect on my attention, because I really just couldn't find my flow with this book. But that being said, there will be plenty of people who do comprehend this book, and this is right up their street and they absolutely love it, because I actually looked, whilst researching for this video, what percentage of the population in the UK are Afro-Caribbean, and I was shocked to know that it's only 1% of the UK population are Afro-Caribbean, with 4% apparently of the entire UK population being black. I thought, I was so baffled by that, I actually checked it 4 times. But yeah, apparently only 1% of the population in the UK is Afro-Caribbean, which is crazy to me. But I mean, how cool is it though that now people of Afro-Caribbean descent, because of this long list, are going to presumably be walking into Tesco, picking up a book, and it's going to have Creole in it. I mean, that's really something really sweet and magical and lovely. So I'm really, really thrilled for that. And I'll be looking forward to hearing reviews of this book. And yeah, I'll be looking out for reviews of this book to see what it's about, because as I say, I don't really feel like I took much away from this book. Next up is River East, River West, and I don't have a lot to say about this novel. This wasn't very good. We open up at a Chinese wedding. As for the writing, there are words and they're on a page. But aside from that, I've seen more personality on a block of cheese. Moving swiftly on, I read Enter Ghost next by Isabella Hamad. Hello, so it is a short while later. I have moved position. Yes, I am sitting on the floor. It is an unseasonably and unreasonably warm day here in Bali, so yes, this glisten is just pure sweat at this point, folks. This is what happens when you live in the tropics. I'm incredibly lucky. I mean, this is my life, wow. But okay, back into where we were. This is Enter Ghost by Isabella Hamad. Now, what I immediately noticed with this book was great form, well-structured sentences. It doesn't seem to waste a word. I am really enjoying first-person narratives at the moment. We open up with a woman at an airport as she is being interrogated as to why she left, why she doesn't live here anymore, why her sister's a resident and she's not, what she's doing here, who she's here to see, etc, etc. And we work out that she has entered Palestine, and because I live in the tropics, it has just started pouring down with rain. So I'm pretty sure this microphone can handle it, and it's now stopped. I think I'm really going to enjoy the literary angle of this novel, as this woman is an actress and she'll be taking part in a West Bank production of Hamlet. I have noticed this is quite heavy on exposition, and I know people tend to not be fans of that, particularly within the literary world, so if that's something that bothers you, then just a heads up on that. I personally don't mind too much about that sort of thing, so I am cautiously optimistic, I would say, about this one. There is enough narrative intrigue in the first 10% for me to want to continue with it and find out what happens, especially as people from our narrator's past have worked out that she's in the country and are messaging her wanting to get back in touch. So there are past relationships at play here that presumably are going to manifest in this novel. Next up, I'm talking about Western Lane, and I feel like this novel needs absolutely no introduction at all, having been on the Booker Prize last year. For me, looking at this novel again, I can't quite decide if I enjoyed the narrator's voice better a second time round. It's certainly one that I don't think I will be picking up off the back of this reread. The form is still pretty unexciting to me, just large walls of text, and despite this being quite a short novel, it feels overly wordy for what it is. I, like many readers, have a slightly harder time relating to child narrators in a sort of meaningful type of way, just because their worldview, their problems, their mindsets are obviously very different to that of an adult. Their vision is narrower, their life experience is more limited, and their cognitive ability isn't fully developed yet, and so all of these things make them incredibly hard to capture accurately by an author who is presumably an adult. So I feel writing that is for adults from a child's perspective are always up against quite the Herculean task. Next up, talking about The Wren by Anne Enright. This is clearly an author who knows what she's doing. The form is pacey and it's broken up on the page, it's easily read. Again, we're seeing first-person narration here, and the themes and characters are reminding me slightly of those of Paul Murray's The Bee Sting. So if that is a alarm bell for success for you and you absolutely loved that book, then I would say that there is a similar thematic and character kind of tone and style going on in this novel. It's also set in Ireland. It's about family and family relationships and relationships in general. It's Ireland, so there's obviously a mix of religion in there and culture and society. We're focusing on the internal musings of one woman, but that was just for the first 10% sample. It very well could switch perspective, as from the blurb I gather this should be the perspective of 3 women. So I'm expecting that to move on at some point. Next up is Megan Nolan's Ordinary Human Failings. Now, I read and DNF'd this at about the 25% mark last May, June time, I think. And surprisingly, in this particular batch of 16 books, this actually doesn't come off too bad in the general scheme of things. I think this is actually going to rank quite highly, just as a measure of the general class of 2024 Women's Prize Longlist edition. I think that she will actually fare quite well with this list of books surrounding her. The writing, the form, all huge ticks here for me. It's punchy, pacey, quick. Form is great. It's well thought out. It benefits and reflects the plot and the style of writing that she's coming from. This is going to appeal, I think, to a broad amount of people. There is a strong hook conceptually at the start, and for me it did kind of, I ended up DNFing it 25%, but will I pick this up again over the duration of this 2024 Women's Prize season and have another go at it? Potentially, quite likely, to see if with fresh eyes I can get something more out of it. But we're dealing here with immigration, there's a dead child, there's grieving parents, lots of plot and perspective changes to keep an audience invested. Next up is Kate Grenville's Restless Dolly, I think it's called. This reads exactly like this book cover would suggest. So it's cute, it's quaint. We're in farmland in rural Australia. We follow initially children, but very quickly we follow them through teenagehood as they get jobs on their family farms and work. There's not a whole lot to report back on from this sample, just because it does feel like a very sleepy plod through some historical fiction, which is going to suit some people down to the ground and not others. So I'm sure you already know at this point whether this book is for you. So I'm going to move straight on to The Blue Beautiful World. This one is really difficult to describe. There's not a whole lot to judge it on. I can't really figure out if this is going to be any good or not based on the Goodreads reviews that I've seen for this, just because even the people who have read it and reviewed it can't seem to be able to tell other reviewers what it's about. It seems very confused. It's heavy on the exposition, just from what I noticed from reading the first 10%. There's not really a whole lot of form going on. There's no sort of hook. Characterization is pretty poor, and that is certainly reflected in some of the reviews that I've seen. So this is a piece of sci-fi, but it's only 250 pages long, which if you are a sci-fi reader, that could potentially give the game away with this, because world building needs time, characterization needs time. 250 pages, is that realistically enough time to do all of that for a sci-fi novel and execute it well? Probably not, right? And I think this is potentially what's been picked up in the Goodreads reviews that I've seen so far of this. I didn't have an enjoyable time reading this sample, but honestly, this was one of the ones that I would have said from the get-go, just reading the blurb, that this one's not for me. So I would love to hear from sci-fi readers what your initial thoughts of this are. Are you going to pick this up? Does this have any of the alarm bells that you would be looking for in terms of page length and blurb and world building and all of these sorts of things that matter to you most when approaching a sci-fi novel in particular? So last up on what is going to have been a marathon filming session for me, an editing session, and then uploading this video, we're at Night Bloom. And the thing that I'm going to say about this book that I have not yet said about any other book is what a fantastic sense of place and setting this has. And that's the first time I've said that for a long list of 16 books. So I think that is significant. The writing style and form aren't particularly exceptional, but equally they're not bad either. It is told from a child's perspective initially, but we quickly move on, and the form helps with any sort of non-linear narrative styles that the mind of a child normally goes on. So the form is quick, there's a pace to it, and so you don't get bogged down in the head necessarily of the child. There's a lot of context going on, a lot of setting up going on, and she very quickly becomes a young woman and is sitting exams to become a doctor. And so yeah, I wouldn't be put off by the initial setup of this. I think it's going to have widespread appeal and high enjoyment factor, which is going to go down very well with all readers. I think because we are taking the perspective of a young woman who is off to America to pursue her dreams, there's going to be a real emotional connection between our protagonist and the reader, reminding me very much of Abi Dare's Girl with a Louding Voice that I read and thought was absolutely wonderful for a very similar reason. This is a young woman who is off to pursue her dream despite huge limitations and challenges in her way. Coming of age narratives are a very popular subgenre that is on trend, and so I feel like this has all the makings of being a really popular entry on this year's list. So we've finally come to the end of the video and all of my thoughts on the 16 samples that I've tried so far. I really hope this has been helpful and that you've enjoyed hearing a little bit more about the writing and content of some of the books that you've been looking at for the Women's Prize Longlist this year, which ones you're going to read and prioritise first. Do let me know down in the comments below. For me, my personal top 3 would be In Defence of the Act, The Maiden and Hangman. Then I have a very clear middle section of books that aren't quite in the top and aren't quite in the bottom. They are Night Bloom, The Wren, Soldier Sailor, Ordinary Human Failings, ENT Ghost, and Brotherless Night. And then I have just the rest of the pack in the bottom really, so that is Western Lane, Restless Dolly, The Blue Beautiful World, 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster, A Trace of Sun, River East, River West, and Then She Fell. Before I go, I just wanted to say a really quick thank you to all of you. I knew going into Women's Prize season that this would be a really good time for me content-wise and subscriber count-wise, and it has been an absolute pleasure to see these videos of mine doing so well over the Women's Prize longlist season. Typically, your views and your subscriber counts go up around, for me at least, go up around Women's Prize season, Booker Prize season and end of year content. And so to see all of my Women's Prize videos hitting about 1.5k, 1,500 views, and my subscriber count for the month being up by 100 subscribers in the month, as well as new members coming over onto my coffee membership. There's been ones rolling in overnight, people signing up for extra videos from me every month. So just absolutely thank you guys so much for the support, especially to my members. It does not go unnoticed, your support does not go unnoticed, and it really means a lot to me that the channel is growing, that you all continue to enjoy the content that I put out, even for deliberately provocative live reaction videos. I will leave it here for today and I will see you really soon, because on Monday we have the International Booker Prize longlist announcement, which I'm so excited for. So I will be reading, as you can see, probably 1 or 2, possibly 3, depending on Hangman goes for the Women's Prize. I'll definitely be reading In Defence of an Act, probably be reading The Maiden, and maybe be reading Hangman. So they're my 3. The rest of the 13 I could probably live without. So overall, not the world's greatest long list for me personally. Have a lovely day guys, thanks so much for watching. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, click the subscribe button, and I shall see you very soon in my next one. Catch you later, bye!